Hi, everyone. Today is August 25, Thursday, and we are here for the SIG architecture meeting today. We are very light on agenda today, and Rian, can you get us started with the E2E tests that need some help?
Thank you very much. Yes, we have two E2E tests. The links are in the agenda. You can open them. They are basically tests that we've prepared to get in just as the release cut. So code 4 happened. So these are ready for review. I think, help me, Stephen, I think both are API machinery endpoints, fairly simple tests. If we can get some eyes on that, I'll appreciate it.
Should apply an update to a namespace.
Yeah, they're both API machinery tests that we got both there.
Okay. So we are testing this one, right? Dot update and making sure that it works.
Yeah, that was the only endpoint that was remaining for that for namespace.
Okay. Okay, this seems very straightforward. Let's get this on SIG API machinery. It's already marked. Let me just triage it quickly. Triage. What's the triage? Oh, priority rather. Important is fine, right?
Yes, that is. Yeah, we're really. I would try not to be too annoying, but there's great expectations throughout the community to get the last inputs in before KubeCon, because that would be really nice. So I will try not to be too annoying, but I will push along quite as we have them, people to make sure we get them on as soon as possible. Because it would be a great day if we can go to KubeCon and say we've got all 100% covered.
Yeah. So other than Jordan, do you want me to put somebody else?
I think he's the key person for that.
Yeah. Let me just make sure there's at least 2 people, just in case David is able to look earlier. Okay. And I'm surprised that this hasn't gone through their weekly triage. Then otherwise we would have seen no.
Yeah. But
okay.
I think that.
Yeah, I thought after this meeting I would take it to their meet. I'll go to API machinery meeting if I don't get review. And it was code freeze this week.
Yeah.
So release week. So
yeah, I don't see anything off in this PR. It looks good. There's a retry on conflict. We get the thing, and then we change the label, and then we push it back out, and then we read it. Updated names. You get the updated names back, and then you check in that. Okay. So worst case, I can help with this too. Okay. Then the next one, you want to walk us through this, Stephen?
Yeah. So for the resource quota status, to start with, if we just go to the code, we're looking at creating a resource quota at the very start. And once that's set up, then down after that, we're just confirming that it has actually got the initial specs are correct based on what we've created, because at that point there is no actual status values at that point. So the first thing I do is do the patching. And once I've done the patch of the status, then we're doing a check on if the value that I set there of 750 is correct, as well as the annotation that was set as well that I picked up from another test. Okay. And then I go through doing the update.
Oh, hang on. So this.
Sorry, Dems. I'm confused. Like traditionally, the resource quota controller itself is the one who's patching status. Is there a reason, like we have a test that is doing this, or versus just waiting for the existing controller to do it?
All the status endpoints, because we need to associate both hitting the endpoint with the actual E2E test name, we're actually having to simulate what the controller would actually be doing. So then API Snoop can both see what the name of the test actually hit the actual status endpoint. So if you go back through all the service ones, pretty much every status endpoint has to be tested this way so that we can associate the endpoint being hit by the actual E2E test name.
How is the default RBAC rules for resource quotas? Will it let like Sonoboy or the E2E test patch things up this way?
This is similar to another resource quota test that got in just before code freeze, where I'd gone through and Clayton had checked off. It's basically the same pattern that I've used.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the fact we're hitting status endpoints in comparison to hitting just the normal in resource endpoints.
Okay.
I guess shouldn't the status values equal the spec values then, if that's what you're simulating? Because like that's exactly what the quota controller would do. It would say, okay, you're asking for this much quota, then the status is saying, I'm actually giving you that much quota. So in a cluster where this test was on and two things were writing, I would assume the resource quota controller would just overwrite status to be what you had set as the spec. And if I'm reading this test wrong, it looks like you don't have the match.
At the very start of when you create the resource, it doesn't actually set the status at the very beginning. But when
right, I was saying if
yeah,
the quota controller would see that the spec was applied and then later patch the status itself. And so if you were setting a status that's different than what the quota controller would be doing, which is what this appears to do, you would get different results is all I'm trying to impart. Like if this is saying I desire a quota with 500 millicores of CPU and half a gig RAM, and then the status block is later patched that says I will give you a quota of 3/4 of a CPU and no RAM. Like I'm expecting 2 seconds later, an existing cube resource quota controller is just going to go and make sure status and spec are equal.
It'll go stomp on what you're doing, basically, right?
Yeah. So if you wanted to simulate what the quota controller was doing, you have to. We're not acting precisely like it here.
Yeah, I'm picking up the process that I've used for the other status endpoints. I'm using the same technique, and I really haven't had anyone because I'm not too sure how the status endpoints are. They just basically a read, like more of a, this is what the current underlying status is, and it's not like
in the case of quota, the status is basically what is enforced. And so basically when you say I desire a CPU and a gig of RAM, you haven't gotten that granted to you yet until the quota controller has reflected those exact values on status. And so in this particular case, like I would expect spec and status to always be equal. And the only cases where they might not be equal, if I recall, was like if you reduce quota relative to what you've already allocated. But either way, what strikes me as awkward on this test is that the status block doesn't match the spec block. And I'm yeah, that's probably the best thing I could say.
Yeah, and the other thing that I can say is like you made some changes here, and that'll be stomped by the controller. so you might it might start becoming flaky depending on when it runs and when the controller updates things, right?
Yeah, the initial tests that I've done haven't shown any flakes per se, but of course I'm only just doing some initial very small test runs on a pretty it's a coin cluster that's got multiple controllers. I've tried to make it as production, so like having the external load balancer and stuff. So I'm just I'd need some extra guidance or a
so basically what Derek was telling you before was like, do the same thing that the resource quota controller would do.
Okay.
Exactly simulate what you put in on the bucket where you need to set it, and then what the resource controller would set the values to. Like if it maps, then it really doesn't matter whether resource quota controller stomped on it or your changes actually cause the updated values, right?
Okay, I'll go through back and have a closer look at the controller code.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you, Derek. The rest looks good. It follows the previous pattern for sure. And
Yeah, I'll comment on the PR, but I just pasted in the chat here where the quota controller is basically calculating status by looking at spec, and the easiest fix for this test would be to make the two values equal.
yeah.
Thanks.
The values same as what would being done by the controller. Okay. Okay, so since Derek spoke up, I'm gonna assign Derek to this.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Okay.
What
Okay.
happens?
Sounds good. Did you add anything else while we were talking, Rian?
Yes. As we have a very short data, so I was going through the remaining endpoints and
Rian, we can't hear you well.
As we have it might be, let me close my video.
Yeah.
Might be internet.
Better.
As we went through it this week, we looked at these and said we should investigate maybe these are ineligible because it's optional, but we haven't looked at it at all. I thought, while we have experts in the room, if there's any opinions about whether these are optional or not, else we can just go dig through the documentation as we try and test them.
I see Mo. Hey, Mo. What do you think?
You're not going to have a functioning cluster without those resources.
Oh, well, the question is I don't know how to phrase it. I guess the best way to phrase it would be RBAC is not a prerequisite, not a prereq for the E2E conformance test. Related to RBAC.
So no, this is not related to RBAC directly. So I'll ignore the fact that I think RBAC should be part of conformance because whatever.
I'll leave
that one alone. But this is generally about authorization, right? But like if you look at that second API call, if you don't have that call enabled, kubelet won't work. So like your cluster will never be able to do potty stuff because it won't be able to do any work. So like, what's the point of a cluster without that?
All right. We suspected that might be the case, but we didn't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, and somebody that know way more says, no, this is like RBAC. You should not. So, okay. That's a good clarification. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, those APIs are just they're exposing the ability to ask the API server, hey, can said actor do something? How the API server evaluates and responds to that question is up to the configuration. It's traditionally RBAC, but it can be webhook or node authorizer, all sorts of things can respond to that request. But That API in itself, I think it's pretty critical. The access review, the self-subject one, okay, fine, you could live without that one. And the I forgot what the difference between, I think that namespace local subject access review is just, I don't think you need that one explicitly. It's just a subset of that middle API. That middle one is what like aggregated API servers, kubelet, and everyone else that sort of interacts meaningfully with the API server needs to work.
Is a service account token used on the namespace one, Mo? I'm trying to think who would be the client of the namespace one versus the cluster.
That one, I think is just a scoping mechanism. So it's a way of, because it's a separate resource, so you could assign authorization to use that endpoint within a namespace, and thus limit the set of questions you can ask the API server to things within that namespace. But it's not dependent on like, is it a service account calling it, or like Mo calling it, or Derek calling it. It's just a scoping mechanism of that broad API, the middle one, which is I have some arbitrary actor and some arbitrary action. Can that actor do this action? Yes or no?
So the only other question for me more is, we can write tests for all these three, right? And yes, for the second one, if without the kubelet won't work, is fair, but the people could be running this in an environment where they have their own kubelet or something like that, right?
Yeah, I suppose. What was your explicit question though? I don't think I understood.
Oh, yeah. The question is like, should we start looking at these three APIs, and should we start writing tests for these? It's like, a check from us on the call before they dive into it.
We'd like approval before we start the work.
Yep.
I think I might be missing some context. Why are we writing tests for this stuff? Is it just for conformance?
Yeah, it's not being tested right now in conformance. So what we end up doing is we look at the list of APIs that are not being tested, and we put it in a bucket to say, hey, we don't need to test these things, or we need to test these things. And then when it goes to the second bucket, then the rest of the process starts.
I think it would be fair if you wanted to skip the first and third one. I might ask like David Eads if what his feelings would be on that second one tested.
Okay, so how about an issue and an email to SIG auth, and we can debate there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I
Rian?
just want y'all to start doing work, folks, other than me decide I work.
Yeah. Hippie, you tried to talk before too, and you were checking your mic and all. So did you have anything else to talk about?
No, I think I was trying to inject something at that moment.
Okay.
I'm back now. I just dropped a link to the list of remaining endpoints. And so this is the list. We'll continue to go back and ask for permission until they're done. And then at that point, we'll probably revisit which of the ones that we've decided are not eligible for conformance do we want to bring back. And that's where we might start discussing things like RBAC and other plans. That was mainly around Mo. Was asking why are we looking at this? And so this is because this is a list we're going through, and we're just prioritizing it for what does SIG architecture want us to work on next.
Well, thanks for that feedback, Mo. I'll make the issue, and then I'll bring it to the SIG auth meeting and have some discussion there because there's also a list of endpoints that is not eligible for various reasons, like storage, like vendor-specific things that you cannot expect people to test for it because it's very specific to a vendor or is not required.
Or it's not testable, right?
Yeah, or it's not testable, or it needs kubelet to work. There's various rules that disallow it for conformance. Yeah. So I'll bring the rules and I'll bring the endpoints and I'll run it past the group because we have spent time on other endpoints, and then after much effort, it turns out it's not eligible. So we rather avoid as we really want to rush the last ones in to get to 100% conformance testing. We are sitting at 95 at the moment, so almost there.
Nice. Sounds good. Okay, a few more people have trickled in. Hi, Ben. Mayank. Did you have
Hi.
anything to talk about today?
Just listening in.
Okay,
Yeah, just listening in. Yeah.
no worries. You feeling better, Ben?
Yes, finally.
Okay, good. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, let's wrap it up for today and see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
This was
Cool.
helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.